All right, good afternoon and welcome everybody. I'm here to introduce Amy Goldman and her topic of AAC and the IEP. Welcome, Amy.
All righty. Okay. Get the tech working. All right, everybody. So I'm going to be talking when I refer to AAC, I am primarily referring to aided AAC. And currently I am with the National AT3 Center. Today's objectives, I'll be talking about what IDEA requirements relate to AAC, where and how you might incorporate AAC in the IEP, at least one thing that you should be thinking of if you are working with kids of age 14 or older, and probably transition should be starting younger than that. And of course, we'll be looking at ways that you can refute common myths about AAC in the IEP. So first of all, you should know I am not an attorney. However, the primary sources that I've used include IDEA, and I include the references in the slide. And some of the resources that are in a slide towards the end have also been resources that I've used in preparation. This presentation has been informed by my experiences with system failures. And most recently, issues around including AAC in the IEP were brought home to me in the recent disaster issues, particularly in Houston, where we heard from several families that either they didn't know that AAC might be something that their student could benefit from, or their student didn't take the AAC that they used in school home, and that was an issue when the schools were closed. So why you should know this information? First of all, you need to be aware of things that are happening both in Washington and in your state capital that might impact on access to AAC and the IEP. If you're a school district employee or another member of an IEP team, you need to understand these things in particular because you probably have a role, or you should have a role, in both developing and implementing the IEP. So you also have an ethical responsibility to be an advocate for your students. And that responsibility is minimally through ASHA for those of you who have your Cs, or state licensure for those of you who are licensed outside of your education certification. So IDEA has a definition of assistive technology. So the definition is quite broad. It is basically any item, and that's why any is italicized. It is any item as long as it is being used to increase, maintain, or improve the functional capacities of a child with a disability. So any encompasses low to high-tech devices. It could be consumer electronics that are being used with an app for a student with a disability. And certainly if we look at that definition of AT, aided AAC is an excellent fit into that definition, whether or not it is high-tech or low-tech. And there you have the Code of Federal Regulations citation. And IDEA also defines assistive technology services, which is a good thing because as practitioners, we know that these devices are not magic bullets, and that certainly services are needed to support the use of a device. Again, the definition in IDEA, in the Code of Federal Regulations, it is any service that directly assists the child with a disability in the selection, acquisition, or use of an assistive technology device. And once again, aided AAC is assistive technology. So we would certainly be including those services as the services that support the selection, acquisition, or use of AAC, whether it is high tech or low tech. And here's a further drill down on that IDEA definition of AT services. So inclusive of evaluation, acquisition, the designing, fitting, customizing, maintenance, repair, and the coordination of these services with other therapies. The AT services definition in IDEA also includes training or technical assistance for the student with a disability and/or his or her family, and training or technical assistance for individuals providing education and rehab services in the use of AT devices. So that includes teachers, paraprofessionals, any other relevant individual who is providing education and rehabilitation services to the student with a disability. So the regulations that were effective in 1999 specify the consideration of a child's AT needs in the IEP. And once again, here you have the citation. So further, the regulation says in all instances, the IEP team must make the determination about whether the disabled child should receive AT, including AAC, as we've discussed, and if so, the nature and extent of the AT provided to the child. So in all instances really means for all children with an IEP. The IEP team should be thinking about AT. So further, the regulations talk about special factors, and these are all opportunities to think about or consider AT. Positive behavioral interventions, the language needs of a child with limited English proficiency, Braille instruction as appropriate, the communication needs of a child who's deaf or hard of hearing, and assistive technology. So looking at these 5 special factors or special considerations, which of them may include AAC? Well, I would posit that AAC may be a positive behavioral intervention, that for some children, we may be talking about AAC in another language. For some children, there may be Braille implications of the AAC. For some children who are deaf and hard of hearing, we may be thinking about AAC. And as stressed before, when we're talking assistive technology, we are definitely including aided AAC. So looking at a typical IEP form, your district may have a form that has a box or a blank where the team decides how they should check the box. Does the student need or require assistive technology devices and services? That is the question that needs to be answered. And no or yes. So, and if the answer is yes, the student needs it, then the team will consider those needs in developing the IEP. And Bugaj and Norton Dar suggest that they also, the team be thinking about where in the IEP the AT needs, or in our case, the AAC needs, will be included. So what does consider mean? Well, it is not defined in IDEA, but it is defined in Webster, and that definition is given careful and deliberate thought. So obviously, when you're thinking about it, you want to have information at hand about the student, about the environment, about access to the general curriculum, what those demands are, what the other IEP goals are, and you need somebody on the team who has a grand understanding, not just of language and communication, but also of the full range of AAC possibilities. So, what do you think? When the team discusses low-tech systems, communication books, pod displays, or PECs, should the IEP reflect the use of assistive technology? Would you check the box in that case? So this is a little bit of audience participation. If you want to enter your answer in Slack, and our moderator will give you 30 seconds and let me know whether anybody has answered.
Amy, so far you've had 4 or 5. Okay, yep, there's a resounding yes to this so far. You have
Okay, excellent. Then you are
already who agree.
Absolutely. Even if it's low tech, the box should be checked. So here's another opportunity for you to respond. Remembering the definition of AT services, which of the following AAC services might be included in the IEP? Providing mom with information about modeling the use of the device, teaching the classroom para about how to troubleshoot, developing and updating a low-tech system, or would you say none of those because only direct service to the student should be included in the IEP? So what answers are coming in?
Okay, Anita says all of those. Leah says 1, 2, 3. Charlotte says 1, 2, 3.
Right.
1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. It sounds like the group is going with 1, 2, and 3 as the
correct.
The main.
Correct. In addition to the direct service to the student, all of these other services and there are more services, but these 1, 2, 3 in these examples should be included in the IEP. Absolutely. So when are we thinking about IEP? The assistive technology certainly is part of the IEP meeting, as part of the initial evaluation and any follow-up evaluations. And I think this is where we might fall short as part of transition planning when considering transition from school to adult life, whether it's community living or post-secondary education or employment. One of my favorite soapboxes is I don't think we do enough consideration at that point. So the team, in doing their consideration, may decide that AAC devices or services are not needed. I mean, maybe they go for manual approach, which is AAC, but not aided AAC, of course. And maybe the team believes that the child's speech is intelligible enough that no tech is needed, or nothing new to augment communication is needed. They may decide that AAC devices or services are needed, and of course, it should be check the box, but go beyond that. The team may be unsure. They may not know which device or if a device is needed. And the team's conclusion may be to go forward with an evaluation. So my recommendation is if you are going forward with an evaluation or trial activities, that should be described in writing. And if trials are being conducted, there should be a plan. We'll talk a little bit about that in a minute. The team may also decide it just doesn't have enough information and it may defer completing the IEP until there is more information available. So again, the obligation is very clear in IDEA that assistive technology devices or services or both must be made available to a child with a disability if required as, and this is where the AAC could fit, as part of special education, as part of related services, and or, in the case of AAC, as a part of supplementary aids or services. So there is no cookbook approach to including AAC in the IEP. As we know, the whole area of practice of AAC has no cookbook. So the best guidance is to think about including AAC wherever it's appropriate, and it could be in multiple places to assure access to the devices and services that the student needs to benefit from FAPE, free, appropriate public education. So for one student, you might be writing it in one place, and in another for another student in another place, and for a third student, you may be incorporating reference to the AAC device in multiple places. So quiet, and I hope you're all familiar with the quality indicators in assistive technology, and the website is given below. So Quiet recommends that when you're including AT, and that includes aided AAC in the IEP, you do it in a way that is clear and complete so that the IEP team and others who use that information to implement the student's program understands what is to be made available, how it is to be used, and when it is to be used. So one example, as I mentioned, is that AT, or aided AAC, may be included in the category of supplementary aids and services. And here's again what the regulations talk about, that aids, services, and other supports are to be made available in regular ed classes and in other education-related settings. Here we are looking at LRE, least restrictive environment. So our challenge as AAC providers, for example, is to be keeping in mind the fact that one of the reasons for AAC in the education setting is for inclusion in the least restrictive environment. AAC also can help support access to the general curriculum. And by the way, these are buzzwords that I'll often use in a report, not so much to health insurance because they don't really care about this, but if you are a private provider and are writing a justification, or even sometimes if you're a school district employee and you are writing a formal report, it is helpful to describe how the use of the AAC system will support access to the general curriculum. Again, that is part of the goal of IDEA. So Here's an example. Marianne uses an iPad with Proloquo to Go, and with the device and the app, she can participate fully in the general ed curriculum as long as she's given additional time to generate her responses. Educational goals and objectives is a natural place to embed AAC. So here we have a couple of examples for your perusal. One for Harry, which talks about how he is going to use his AT, what he's going to use specifically here, an iPad with GoTalk app, how it will be measured. Haley's using the Nova Chat, and again, we have a goal for her with measurable data. Marianne also is using either aided or unaided strategies, much more open-ended kind of a goal without the aided strategy being specified, but it also describes what she'll be doing and how we're going to sample and measure it and who's going to be doing the sampling. So AAC can also be described under program modifications and specially designed instruction. So again, here we're talking about Haley and her daily schedule. So again, this is low-tech AT. Switch software, computer, and interface for leisure, that's also AT. And her Nova Chat is also AT. Here we have Marianne. Again, this is a modification, program modification. And what I like about Marianne's program modification written into the IEP is this describes that Marianne will have full access to the device in home and community settings. So we talked before, and you all correctly identified that supports for school personnel is certainly an AAC/AT service. So here we have an example that the special ed director will schedule a training for Marianne's teachers, her SLP, and her parents so that they are able to customize and troubleshoot the iPad and her apps. I like this because it also specifies when the training will take place. Here's another example. By June 1st, the SLP will arrange for next year's special ed teacher and next year's SLP to observe how AAC is incorporated into current classroom routines and instruction. So June 1st may even be a little bit late, depending upon where your school district is and how much instruction actually takes place after June 1st. But it is an example. And, sometimes we do have a challenge that next year's either special ed teacher and or next year's SLP is an unknown. So you might want to be thinking about how could I capture these things in order to provide them to next year's staff. So it may be that you're going to plan to use some video so that you could share that information. Another example of supports, the SLP in Haley's new school. And remember that transition also often happens between elementary and middle school, between elementary schools, between middle and high school, and sometimes if the child is moving perhaps out of district. So ideally, the SLP in Haley's new school will have expertise in using BoardMaker or some other way to produce the visual symbol supports and device overlays that she needs. And if the SLP does not have that expertise, that he or she will be provided with instruction by current staff and or time to learn the program independently during the first 2 weeks of school. And here what we're getting at, hopefully, is a way to make sure that the child who is encountering new school personnel is not going to have 6, 8, 10 weeks of delay before his or her program can be completely implemented in the next year. Realities: identifying the appropriate technology is not always easy. And particularly as we know that new products are coming out all the time, new apps. So how do we make the decisions? Well, getting a device demonstration may help identify which devices have features that could help your student, and device trials can be empirical ways to identify appropriate technology and then put it in the IEP. So if you're doing device trials, including app trials, you may want to develop a plan of which device to try first and then sequentially. Sorry, this is a little bit of a Pennsylvania specific slide, but you might want to be looking at the resources for obtaining a device loan. And again, devices and services. Who can provide the services to make a trial meaningful? And who needs training to provide those services? Otherwise, you are undermining the efficacy of the trial period. So hopefully you know about the state AT programs that may be resources for demonstrations and or for equipment loan in your state. If you don't, you can go to www.at3center.net and go to the Find Your State Program link, and you can select a directory. For example, there's a directory just on device loan programs, and then enter your state, and you will get the contact for device lending programs. So a little bit more information about what I think is a good way to guide you on the road to device trials. This is not required in the IEP, but having a written plan developed by the IEP team meeting can help avoid some issues that, for example, I have heard from parents who believe, and it's very unfortunate, and it speaks to breakdown in a relationship, parents who believe that the school district is trying to avoid making a decision because then they have to provide the device. And the parents feel like they're being literally jerked around by having multiple trials. So to me, this is good practice that your IEP team wants to talk about the device trials, when they would begin, where they take place, and how long they last, the device to be tried or devices, the goals, scope, and time of the device trial, how you're going to get the trial devices, who's the person responsible for making those arrangements, what kind of data are you collecting? What clinical questions are you trying to answer by having these device trials? Does it have to do with the size of the icons? Does it have to do with number of icons? Does it have to do with quality of the voice output, which thankfully more and more is a moot question? What are the questions you're trying to answer by the trials? How will your data be collected and analyzed? What is the criteria for success? How will you know when you've gotten to a successful trial? And what do you do at that point? Do you then stop having additional trials and go right to looking at acquisition for the identified item? Why, if you don't do that, why do you go to another device? What are the unanswered clinical questions? And you want to have a date at which you will review the data that you've collected during the trials and when you're going to make a decision. Keeping in mind also that having many device trials puts an incredible cognitive load on your student. So really try to narrow down what the questions are that you're seeking answers to in device trials. Make sure the trials are long enough to answer your questions, and stop the trials when you've got the answers. So back to our realities. Schools cannot limit AT to in-school use only. But this is a decision that must be made on an individual basis. And once the team has made that determination, it should be put in the IEP. So here's the law. This is probably one of the most frequent questions that I field, which is, what does the law say about taking technology home? The law says, on a case-by-case basis, the use of school-purchased AT devices, including AAC, of course, in a child's home or in other settings is required if the child's IEP team determines the child needs access to those devices in those settings in order to receive a free, appropriate public education. Personally, when it comes to communication devices, I am hard pressed to think of an example why the team would not believe that the child would need access to his communication device across settings, across waking hours. However, we do know that this happens all the time. In some cases, there are fears about damage to school property. However, this cannot be a reason for denial. The school cannot have a across-the-board policy that AAC can't go home. Remember, it's an individualized decision. Schools and the teams must think about the IEP goals that necessitate the equipment leave the school. Consider all alternatives and then provide what is needed for a free, appropriate public education. The bottom line here is a case-by-case decision. So, a scenario for you to ponder, what would you do? Sammy's a 7th grader with CP and he uses Innova Chat. The team is discussing when to allow the device to go home. What do you think? You can answer in the chat.
Thanks, Amy. I'm going to give him a second to chime in.
Okay.
You have 3 responses so far, and they are always and all the time.
All right.
All of the above.
Absolutely.
That's the consensus.
Great. So here we have Rosalie. She's a 3rd grader with autism. And since October, the device has come into school with the screen cracked twice. It often comes into school not charged. There is frequently food and other mysterious substances around the charging point. And the team is discussing whether to allow the device to continue to go home. What do you think? What would you do? give you all a moment to think about that.
First response is meet with parents to discuss expectations, create a plan or agreement with parents, discuss a different case. At least she's using it because it's getting banged up. Training, consultation, get a different case, discuss care with the parents, support the parents. Do they need more support at home? It sounds like that's the consensus, is conversation with parents and maybe a better case, protection for the device.
Those are all great answers, and so pleased that nobody said, obviously, you don't send it home anymore.
One more, consider a low-tech backup copy of the language system. I like that idea.
Okay, these are all great things for the team to be discussing to make sure that the student still has access to a means of communication. Good job. So here we have Mr. and Mrs. Jones. They've got good insurance, and they decided to just purchase the recommended device that's in Sam's IEP. The device is in Sam's IEP because they want to avoid the whole issue of taking technology home and when and all those things. They're also concerned because they see that Sam is 19 and they want to facilitate that transition. And they're also, they pay taxpayers, they're taxpayers in their community, and they understand that the school budget didn't pass. So they're really, really good sports. However, the device just stopped working. And even though they tried and the SLP tried basic troubleshooting, the device has stopped. And they have asked the school to pay for the repair. So what do you think? Must the school do that? Audience participation, please.
No, but the school does need to provide another matching or appropriate AAC system. IEP team meeting, discuss options. The school should purchase a device, or school could purchase an extended warranty. One person says our AT department would do the paperwork and have the device repaired. It's not school property, so it's not the school's obligation, but maybe offer a replacement. That's the general trend of the first few answers, Amy.
Okay, great job. The school still has the bottom line responsibility to provide a device because it is in the IEP. So really the path that they take is up to them. In most cases, it is far cheaper for the school to undertake paying for the repair than it is for them to buy the device, buy a new device. Good thought about getting extended warranties. And I do know of situations where the family has been kind enough or resourced enough to buy the device, and the school has paid for the extended warranty, just as a source of protection. But all good answers. The responsibility remains to provide it, and the team can decide how they want to make sure it is still provided. Okay, resistance to putting AAC in the IEP. Certainly, there are budgetary concerns, but hopefully the team has the students' best interests at heart. Sometimes, however, we have resistance from the team because one or more members doesn't think that the child is ready, particularly for a higher tech device. We do also see resistance from parents due to concerns about the impact of AAC on the development of speech. And actually, unfortunately, we do see that sometimes from team members also who are concerned about, quote, giving up on speech by going to AAC. So I do know that those are challenges that you all may have. I'm on probably too many Facebook groups where these issues still occur daily, it seems, despite what IDEA says. So here's an interesting challenge and something that may vary district to district, state to state. If you name the device or the app, and that's what you put in the IEP, that is the item the school is obligated to provide. So my thesis is, if you have gone through the assessment process and the team has agreed on device A, then that's what should be named in the IEP. I do know that in practice, in some districts, in some states, what is done is the device is described but not named. My feeling is, if a new device comes along that looks to be more appropriate, then reconvene the IEP team meeting. But you should know what the practice is in your district. Another reality is that an iPad or a specific app is not the answer to every AAC need. So decisions, again, are meant to be individualized, the I in IEP. It should be individualized, not school policy or procedure. Again, I see this as an issue that the school has adopted a specific app or a specific method. It is up to you as a team member and advocate for the student who needs AAC to figure out how to counter and justify an individualized decision that may be at odds with what the school has adopted. Again, that's your role as an advocate. So the responsibility to provide AT, and in our case, AAC, in accordance with the child's IEP, the guarantee for free appropriate public education rests with the local school district. Free means free. A means appropriate. And this is interesting, and I encourage you all to strike the word best from your evaluation report vocabulary for students, because the standard is just that it is appropriate. And this was a very interesting decision that I encourage you to look up. It didn't have to do with aided AAC, but it did have to do with sign language. P, this is public. So if the parents are placing the child in a private school, none of this applies. And the E stands for education, necessary to derive meaningful benefit from the educational program. So, another opportunity for you to give your thoughts. Hawking Elementary School had a student with significant disabilities move out of state. The eye gaze system she used was put in the closet, but it still can operate. A student who was a drowning victim just returned to school. An evaluation indicates an eye gaze system. The parents want a brand new system. If the team has determined that the system that was in the closet still works and will meet her needs, does the school have an obligation to provide a brand new system? What are the alternatives? Your thoughts, all?
I can tell people are typing. Hold on 1 second. The one in the closet is good. Definitely try all the existing equipment. Depends on the language system on the one in the closet. It's not just the access method.
Oh, excellent point.
Bonus points for Anita. Good job on that one. Yeah, that's kind of what the consensus is. Try what's existing hardware first to see if it works as a trial, and if it's appropriate. And that's the word that's come up a couple times. Is this one appropriate to meet that student's needs?
Exactly, exactly. You know, you will encounter parents who want the best, the most, the newest system, but as long as the system that the school has at hand is appropriate, they can certainly use a previously owned device, and they can find used devices anywhere one can find used devices, whether it's in their closet, whether it's on Craigslist or eBay. You might be surprised how much assistive technology is on those systems, or whether it is in one of the reuse programs that might exist in your state. And if you want to find the reuse program in your state, if you go back to the slide that talked about finding the loan program in your state, you can use that same website to do a search for reuse programs and see if there's one the school could buy, you know, for pennies on the dollar, or might even be able to get for free. Here's another one. Over the River School District understands its obligation to provide AAC at home if that is what the school district, the IEP team determines. However, they have a policy that parents have to obtain a rider on their homeowner's insurance to cover repair or replacement of any device that costs the district more than $5,000. Can they do that? Your thoughts? Type away.
Got a quick bunch of no's on that one. I don't think so. Nope. And no.
Okay.
Some say maybe, but the consensus is no, because that would not be free for parents.
That is perfect. I don't know of any homeowners insurance that'll add a special rider for free. And now, if the district said they would pay the cost of the rider, reimburse the parents, they could do that. But it would violate the F and FAPE if the parents had to foot the bill for the cost of that insurance. Good job. Okay, so basically we have a school district that has a kid with an IEP that specifies an AAC device, and we acknowledge that the school has the responsibility to provide, and the school is allowed to seek other funds. I have a picture of a spaghetti dinner, a spaghetti there, because the school can decide to hold a spaghetti supper or a cookie sale in order to purchase the device if they have no other funds. The caveat there is that the fundraising may not result in a delay in providing the device. And I would hope that they don't come to the spaghetti supper to raise money for Bill's device, violation of confidentiality. Okay, so on the previous slide, said no delay is permissible. However, reality is sometimes delay is unavoidable. So the question is the school district making a good faith effort to have no delay? We have seen sometimes where you might have ordered a new device and the manufacturer is experiencing delays. Well, you've done everything possible. So you're in a no-fault situation. And in that case, you should also go and see what kind of loaners that you could obtain. Funding AT in some districts and in some states, Medicaid will cover services provided in school. For that to happen, the student must be a recipient of Medicaid, and the school must be enrolled as a Medicaid provider. The service must be medically necessary. The great thing is that Medicaid in the schools may cover certain things that are usually not coverable. So, for example, in Pennsylvania, the school-based program of Medicaid will cover iPads that are not covered under regular Medicaid and, in fact, may not be covered by other insurance programs. A key issue here is if the child's Medicaid is used, the child owns the device, and there should be no issues around bringing the device home or transition, graduating with the device. If the school, however, purchases a device, they own it. If the school purchases it with their funds, the school can retain it. Now, there might be a cost share arrangement, and I've seen this happen too few times, but still great. If the school says, for example, they will pay any deductibles and co-pays, if the family's health insurance will pay the remainder, that's a great opportunity to collaboratively make sure the child gets what they need. However, there should be a written agreement that ownership belongs with the student and family, and again, in writing. It's very important to address ownership and the transfer of any device during transition planning. So in transition planning, we want to think about the need for AAC in post-school settings. Understand that while you may think it's hard to get AAC for kids, it is really hard to get public resources to pay for AAC for adults. Planning for the replacement of current AAC systems should happen prior to graduation. And in the case of a 19-year-old, for example, if we can introduce a new AAC system prior to graduation so the student gets the services to learn the new system before they graduate, that would be ideal and should be a component of transition planning. You want to be training and empowering the student and the family about how to get a new device. You want to make sure they understand how the device operates and can be maintained. You may want to help the student and his or her family identify the need for services after graduation and where they might find them, and direct the student and family to potential funding sources post-graduation. So here are some great resources for you to peruse. And I have time for a few questions. Do we have any questions?
We do have a couple good questions, Amy. Back when you were speaking about training being reflected in the IEP, we had a couple people ask, how would you write the time for things like teaching para the troubleshooting when sometimes administrators want something very clear and not open-ended to say kind of as needed. Do you have any recommendations about how to document those kind of indirect services in their times?
So one of the things to keep in mind is, of course, you're going to be dealing with person A who might be technophobic and person B who might be totally comfortable with technology. So they're going to look a little bit different. So you might want to get a feel for the individual's knowledge and comfort level. You might want to be very clear on the competencies, the skills that you want the adult that you're training to acquire, and give a start of a time frame, best guesstimate, and then you may need to reconvene the IEP team if one of those adults needs more time. So I hope that answers your question.
That's awesome. One more, some districts ask that their staff do not say things like evaluation or assessment in the IEP. They ask that they say it's being further considered, but it's determined by the IEP team whether it's necessary and what key features will be identified. Is that okay, I guess, is the question.
Yeah, I have no problem with the outcome of the first meeting being we're not able to make a decision at this point. What I don't think is satisfactory is if there's no plan for acquiring the information that they believe they need in order to make a decision and no potential date. So again, I'd hate for a student go, 5 months without a decision being made one way or the other.
Awesome. Thank you, Amy. I think that generally covers, we had one more person ask about how to find a resource, whether Medicaid will do supply equipment in their particular state. Another attendee suggested that they look at, because that's a state-by-state decision likely, that you need to go to your state's Medicaid page. Would you agree?
And you know who else might be able to help you is your state's Assistive Technology Act program. So if you go back to that web page that I mentioned,
yep,
and you can just get the general contact information for your state AT program and ask them that question. They should be knowledgeable about what Medicaid in your state will or will not pay for.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Amy.
Okay, well, if there's no more questions, thank you for spending this hour with me and enjoy the rest of the conference.